leave all edges unsanded, and never modify anything in a bid for a bigger audience. We were lucky to be teenagers in the 80s, futzing around with instruments we didn't quite know how to play, during a rare and oddly open moment when a scruffy crowd of like-minded souls gathered, far from the gloss and waste of the big-time music business, and an underground network arose that spanned the globe. Venues, bands, zines, fans, record labels, record stores, college radio stations. It seems accidental and frankly miraculous that we all ended up in the same rooms at the same time, but we did, and in those rooms a culture was built, by hand and often from the barest of raw materials. On tour, our bands crashed on fans' floors, not in hotels, and rode in rattling vans, not fancy buses. We loaded and unloaded these vans by ourselves each night. We rarely had managers or other middlemen. We often dealt directly with club owners and labels. Or we released records on our own, selling them to the companies that distributed them to record stores, hand-packing promotional copies into cardboard boxes to mail them to the 100 or so college radio stations that cared and all the fanzines we knew. We built this thing, our own circuit, because we had to, because otherwise it wouldn't have existed, and because it felt like a life-and-death matter that our favorite bands and our own bands got heard. Just enough people erected just enough of an infrastructure to make possible the foundation of a parallel music industry, one that also entailed 3 record deals and international tours, while still remaining a tight and mostly welcoming community. It was a swimming hole small enough and secret enough for you to know everyone in it. It wasn't hard to float atop its surface for a couple of records and tours if your band was good, and sometimes even if it wasn't. There was always something provisional and flimsy about all this before the likes of Pavement and Nirvana started selling records in greater than 5-figure quantities, and even afterward. Labels and distributors and clubs and promoters were always going out of business, so money that was owed frequently disappeared outright. As I write, Sub Pop Records is still around, 28 years after releasing its first records. Congrats! It has also almost gone under at least 4 times, and, who knows, may well be gone by the time you read this. All this happened long before the internet was anything, which meant that while we lacked a key communications channel for tightly knit outsider communities, our generations weren't distracted by a mythology of getting filthy rich young in a sort of cool and webby way. If you got out of college in the post-Reagan economic doldrums, as I did, well, why wouldn't you play in a band and live off temp jobs? So, beginning in my late teens, many of my most cherished experiences took place in dusty practice spaces crammed with barely functioning equipment, inside cramped and overfull vans, and in small clubs that stank of cigarette smoke and yeast from old spilled beer and featured absolutely horrifying bathrooms. You learned, eventually, to bring soap and toilet paper with you on tour. You couldn't count on either being there when you arrived at the venue. Once I found this world, I found my home. The people who remain my closest friends to this day. My tribe. Or rather, our tribe, because I was not the only one looking for these people and the small patch of land that was ours and ours alone. I threw myself upon it with a great and almost tearful relief. And above all, I loved the music. I loved it so much it made my whole body hurt. It also fried my ears and left them ringing, but sometimes love extracts a price. The bands I most liked, the bands I was in, were guitar-based, quite loud, aggressive, eager to explore varying degrees of complexity and compositional ambitiousness, and instrumentally oriented, even though most had vocalists. I mention many in this book, but some of my favorites are Scratch Acid, Slovenly, Gore, The X, Meat Puppets, Slint, Swans, Mission of Burma, and Bastro. The best known among them are probably Black Flag and Sonic Youth. None would exist were it not for punk rock, but none were just punk rock. Apart from that distinction, allow me to give up right now on trying to classify this stuff. Many times in this book, I just say something like weird bands, which is somewhat imprecise and